Hello and welcome. Today I want to talk about termination response. What is the best attitude to have or to display after a person is being terminated or discharged from his or her employment? That's an important topic, and I think it requires some reflection. God forbid that either one of us or any one of us is ever in that position. In the workplace, employees do separate from the organization, or they tend to transition to something new by getting a new job, by retiring, by dying in some cases, and by voluntarily or involuntarily terminating their employment in the workplace. So termination situations can be very stressful, very difficult, and sometimes shocking, and at times unexpected when performance problems are not always communicated effectively with employees. And it is especially shocking for employees when the consequences of their performance issues have not been communicated effectively. Keep in mind that managers are often very, very fearful of communicating performance problems with employees. So many managers do not get sufficient training and development on how to do this properly. So it is a very stressful situation for managers as well. During terminations, I have seen some employees actually leave the organization amicably. In other words, they're not burning the bridges, which is really a relationship or metaphor for keeping the relationship intact so you can cross that bridge in future opportunities. However, I've also seen and observed and heard of a few workers that got extremely upset. They yelled, they screamed, they kicked, they punched, and sometimes they said things, did things that they regretted later. Is it worth it to burn your bridges on the last day or last week of your transition from your current employment to perhaps something new? Voluntary and involuntary transitions are a reality of life, even when employees have performed beyond the standards, beyond the manager's expectations. If one is ever in this position of being discharged or terminated involuntarily, how should you respond? What attitude should you display to your employer, to the managers, and to your colleagues in the organization? So that is the focus of today's lecture, and we're very lucky to have an experienced professional, Dr. Rolando Ochoa, who has played many roles in his past, such as that of a university professor, an employee, a manager, and a high-level leader in the banking industry. Dr. Ochoa will provide suggestions and recommendations for anyone who goes through a transition or through a termination from his or her current job in the organization. Let us begin. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Rolando Ochoa, for being here and for sharing your time and insights regarding employee attitude during terminations, during discharge, or when basically we're transitioning from our existing organization to maybe a new organization or even a new industry. Before we get into the termination discussion, would you be kind enough to please give us a highlight of your professional work experience over the past 4 decades or so?
Well, I hope you have enough time because, it's, no, I'm only kidding. It's a long story. Well, I started in banking in 1970. I was a computer programmer at the time, and I started in banking there at the 1970 in a bank working in the computer department. And then, my career started. I had only high school at the time and the computer class. So after I started there, I was transferred to the accounting department. And even though I never had accounting, so my boss says, well, you need to get some accounting classes. So so I went to Broward College and did an associate degree in banking and in business. And then my career took off after that because of obviously my educational part of my resume was pretty weak, so I had to beef it up. So then I moved up to different banks and got promoted, and worked as a branch manager. Also worked as lending officer, and I had a one time I was CEO of one small bank in Tamarack, and for a while. Then, I worked for the big banks. I worked for, all the large banks here in town and in the South Florida area. And, I became a lender, and then, the mergers, the big mergers on banks and what have you, I had to sort of go back to being a branch manager, and that's what I did for the last 10 years. I was a branch manager and a business developer, and obviously that's how I finished. And in the meantime, I went back to school. I got my master's at UM, and then I was lucky enough to get my doctorate degree at Nova, and I had you as one of my professors. And I have to say that you are the number one professor in my list. It's not because you're here, because it's true. I learned so much about you, from you, I mean. And so I was lucky to have you as the chairman of my committee for my dissertation. So grateful to you forever for that. And then, I quit banking. I retired, so to speak, from banking. And then I went to work as a professor at Miami-Dade College. It took me a while. So in the meantime, I was part-time in different schools, including Nova. I taught a couple of semesters in the economics department. And I finally got a position of assistant professor at Miami-Dade College in the management area. And I taught in the bachelor's program. And then I became an associate professor, and I was there for about 7 years. And then I decided to retire from that too. And so now I'm pretty much enjoying my time in writing. I love to write, and I have written a couple of books and articles and what have you. I'm also a musician, so my only job right now is playing music and singing. So that's what I'm doing now. But I really miss the action of management and also teaching. I love teaching. So maybe one day I'll come back. Who knows?
Well, great. What a rich background in diversity of experiences in different industries you have. We're so lucky to have you here to share your insights with us. And the future students will be watching this video, but also the hundreds and thousands of students who have already benefited from your experience during your teaching semester. So thank you again for being here. Now let us begin with the termination issue. So after being terminated from a job, despite the fact that there's going to be initial disappointment and shock for many employees, what attitude should an employee hold, and why do you believe the way you believe?
Well, you have to have a positive attitude. I mean, even though you're probably going to get angry, you want to scream, you want to, throw a fit, but that is counterproductive, totally. You have to think of the future. You might be right. They're terminating me unjustly. You might be right, but then if you make a big fuss, you're the one that get hurt. It's better, really, even if it is, sometimes terminations are, shall we say, justified. You didn't do what you're supposed to do. You violated the policies, or you whatever. You did things that are not that we're supposed to do, and then you get terminated. Well, don't make a big fuss. It was your fault. You did something wrong. Try to leave as a friend. Try to leave with grace and with professionalism, and then say you're sorry, and that okay, thank you for the opportunity, and this way maybe in the future there might be a chance. But if you make a big fuss about it, maybe that person that that you're making the big fuss about it moves up to another company where you're trying to get a job, and that person remembers you and says, "Oh, don't hire this person because that person's a troublemaker. So don't hire." So you have to be careful with that because it is your future references are important. Even if you were terminated for a reason, like bad performance or what have you, you still, references are there, because that, the worst thing you can do is to make yourself angry and make a scene. That is if you are terminated with, shall we say, with it's a just termination. Now, sometimes terminations are not just. They are either due to mergers or due to downsizing or due to, I don't know, personality problems or whatever it is, or even discrimination. And then those are harder to accept. Those are much harder to accept because, you haven't done anything wrong. You did a great job. And then all of a sudden, here's your pink slip. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Those are hard to swallow. And those are the ones that we have to be even more careful when we do, because we don't want to close that door. We don't want to burn that bridge. We want to be able to remain professional and remain with grace and, okay, I understand, it's your decision. No matter how much fuss you make, no matter how much you angry you get, they're not going to change their mind. Because they already did the position, you're not going to change their mind, so might as well don't argue. Just say, take it, bite your tongue, and then go. Flip the page, and then find something else.
Well, that is golden advice, obviously, for everybody who unfortunately may encounter such a termination or transition, whether it's for just cause or for issues that are beyond the employee's control or even beyond the manager's control. So when there's downsizing, merger, or other undisclosed reasons for termination, the key, as you mentioned, for us is to accept and move on, because there's no good that can come out of you being angry, upset, or making a big deal out of this change, because as you mentioned, we cannot really change their mind at this stage. The decision has already been made. Having said that, have you ever found yourself at the crossroads of employment turmoil, such as a termination or a resignation? If you have found yourself in this position before, how did you personally deal with this?
Well, I have to give you a story, which I didn't do. I didn't do the right thing. I did the wrong thing. And that's how you learn sometimes. You learn by your mistakes. So I was working for this really big bank, okay, and I thought I was doing a good job, and they had like a job posting. So they posted this job, which was better than the one I had, and I thought I was qualified, so I applied for it. And the person who interviewed me, this is back in the 70s, so laws back then were not as strict as they are now when it comes to different things. So this guy had the guts to tell me in my face, "Oh, we will never put a Cuban in that position." Totally open discrimination from day one. Okay. But he thought that was the right thing because of the neighborhood where that bank was, et cetera, et cetera. I think it was wrong, but obviously he thought it was right. So I then got upset and then got another job somewhere else, another bank, and I went to my exit interview, and that's where I made the mistake. I threw this guy under the bus. This is what he said, and the person in the HR department was outraged at that, and I guess calling him up and shoot him up, I guess, after I left. And I went to another bank. So then time passes, and I applied for this other bank, a position. And guess what? The guy was working there. And the moment he found out, I mean, I don't know this for sure, but I'm pretty sure that that's what happened, because I had several interviews and everything was looking good for me. And all of a sudden I get a call back saying, oh, I'm sorry, we selected somebody else. And then I figured that he put in the 2 cents and say, don't hire Rolando because he's a troublemaker. And so that was wrong. That, when you the other places where I have worked, I really, I remember one time I went to this bank and they were after me for years. And then I go there and I'm there like maybe 5 or 6 months, and then they terminate me. And for no reason. I said, why is the reason? I said, no, we don't have to tell you. So, I said, see, I've learned my lesson from before. So I said, okay, well, thank you. When do you want me to leave? He says, well, you can leave right now. We will pay you, a whole month, but you can leave whenever you want to leave. So I said, okay, I'll leave right now. So I pick everything and I left, and that's it. That was the end. More professional, I think. So those are the two samples, personal experience. And let me tell you, it's not easy. It's not easy to accept a termination, but you have to, you have to learn to do it.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing that example. And also, obviously, you did cause a paradigm shift in that manager's mindset not to make racist or biased discriminatory statements. So hopefully other people were not victims like you were in that case. But nonetheless, obviously, we need to leave and transition in such a way that is considered professional, and also hopefully does not cause any harm to the future possibility of returning back to the organization or another organization, like you mentioned. Now, the next question deals with the same issue of discrimination. If discrimination reasons are suspected in a person's termination due to a disability or ethnicity or gender or other protected categories, should a person mention this during the exit interview or pursue even a lawsuit? Why or why not?
Well, like I said, now most people are very careful. Most managers are very careful as to what to say. And I think that most managers now, or at least in my experience in the last few years that I was working, actually, I saw very little discrimination. It was like, you do the job, you got it. You don't do the job, we find somebody else. And, without any, of course, many times when you are at the receiving end of termination and you're a minority, the tendency for many people, not for everybody, for many people, is to say, well, they fired me because I was this race, or I was this national origin, or this gender, or whatever, like you say, protected groups. I think that's a mistake. At least to bring it up at that time. Now, if you really have a true case of harmful discrimination, okay, I don't think anybody should put up with that. If you really have, and you have the evidence, that's you have to prove it. See, when you go to court, you're the plaintiff. You have to prove that it was discrimination. And that's very hard to prove. And even if you prove it, even if you get a judgment, even if you get paid, your career is over. Because that nobody in that industry is going to hire you because they're afraid of you. So even though you want to do it, in your inside is just, they shouldn't have done that to me because of my whatever area of discrimination. But again, you have to remember that the consequences could be worse than actually losing the job. And I know this is very hard for some people because a lot of people walk around, I don't mean a lot of people, a few people walk around with a chip on their shoulder about their minority status, whatever that is. And that is wrong. That provokes more discrimination if you have that attitude. So you have to sort of blend in whatever it is that you're working and forget about your minority status, whatever it is, and then do the best you can. And then, you know, the last bank that I worked was they had a very good system because you had a salary, the manager, you had a base salary, and then you have opportunities to make more money with performance. So you made the performance, they couldn't care less what your minority status was. Now, you didn't make the performance, they say goodbye. And I think that's fair for everybody. There's no discrimination for, you know, women and men or you know, black and white, Cubans, whatever. There's no discrimination. You do the job, you bring the customers, you make money for the bank, here you stay. And I think it's a good system of base salary plus an incentive on production. And this will neutralize any discrimination or any feeling of discrimination because numbers are there. You're supposed to do 1 million, you only did 100,000, goodbye. No, because you're doing it because I am a woman. No, I'm doing it because you didn't meet your budget, whatever it is. So that's, you know, what we have to be careful. And again, don't fight a fight that is you're gonna lose every time. No matter, you might win, but then you lose.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that. And obviously, the key is not to make any rash decisions at the moment or during the termination or discharge process, because if you do have evidence that proves that there was discriminatory intent or discriminatory practices taking place in this termination process, you can always bring that up next week. You can always talk it out with your family members or colleagues or even a lawyer, an attorney, but there's no reason to make a big deal during the termination process. So sleep on it, wait for a few days, and then make an assessment.
Yeah.
So having said that, what other recommendations do you have for employees that are being terminated or even managers that are doing the termination in today's organizations?
Well, you know, managers, obviously, you know, is for the most part, in my experience, most managers are not discriminatory. But I think the key to protect yourself against anybody accusing you of discrimination, even if you didn't do it, some people are going to go and accuse you of something because you fire them, or you didn't promote them, or whatever it is. The key is one word: documentation. You document whatever it is that is happening with this employee, the deficiencies and the good things, and then keep a file. It's not an official file, it's your file. You, at this point, you're just writing yourself notes, which is totally illegal, and you have it there in case something happens. You have dates and you have situations. When that happens, then you can pull it up and say, well, this and that and the other. That's the first thing, documentation. And the other one is, most companies that are worth anything, they have a procedure in place to reprimand and to try to corrective action procedure when somebody is not doing the job. You know, obviously, if you failed something, you know, you're not going to get fired right away, unless it's some kind of dishonesty. You stole something or whatever it is, then there's no corrective action here. You're gone, especially in a bank. If you steal money from a bank, you're finished, you're history. But if it's something else, performance or attitude or whatever it is, make sure that you follow the 3 steps of corrective action. First, verbal warning. And then you document that verbal warning. Such and such a day, I told such and such this and that, the other and the other. And he or she answered this and that, and you keep that. Now, let's say you give them 30 days to correct the attitude. So then that they didn't correct the attitude. So now you go into a written warning, which the written warning then is part of the file, the HR file. And then you say, now I gave you a verbal warning. Now is the written warning. And you have whatever, 30 days to correct this. If that is not corrected, then you will be terminated. And then normally most companies, they ask the employee to acknowledge that, to sign. Sometimes you get trouble with that because they say, I'm not signing that. I didn't do what you said. I said, you're not signing that you agree with me. You're signing that I told you this. You're acknowledging. And sometimes they don't want to sign, which is fine, which is a sign that maybe they really don't belong there because they have that antagonistic attitude, So, and then finally, if they don't do it, then you give them the final warning and said, you're gone. Now, it's very hard to fire people. It's probably one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life is to let people go because you're not only you're hurting that person, you are hurting their family, who knows what else. And so it's in your conscience when you're doing it. So you have to be convinced that you did everything possible to save this person, that you did everything possible to train this person or to whatever, counsel that person. And then if the person doesn't want to do it, it doesn't seem to, or maybe they can't do it, then you don't have a guilty conscience anymore. You did everything you can and then that person comes back and said that you did it for discrimination, and you have adult documentation that that person, and I'm sure that sometimes you've been teaching for a long time. Sometimes students might come up and say, well, you gave me an F because you're discriminating me because I am whatever. And if you don't have all the documentation of all the failing grades and the test and the quiz and the paper you didn't do and you were absent here and there and there, then you're sunk because they are accusing you. I had one student one time accusing me of that the reason that I gave her an F is because she was a minority. And I said, well, okay, let me show you my records. You were absent so many days. You didn't do the quizzes. You flunked the midterm. You flunked the final. You didn't do your paper. What else can I give you? Oh, what is the name of your supervisor? And say, okay, the name of supervisor is this and that, and that's the phone number. You can call her anytime. So when somebody asks you for a supervisor, it's always good for you to call the supervisor and say, in case this person calls you, let me give you my side of the story. So the supervisor hears your side of the story first. That's important. When they get the call, by the way, in this case, that person never called the supervisor. It was just a bluff to see if I would give up. But she was barking at the wrong tree, because so I think those are and then I think it's important to assist the employee being terminated as much as you can in getting another job. Saying, well, maybe if you go to this training, maybe if you do this, or why don't you call such and such? It's a friend of mine who works in another company, and maybe they can work with you there. You do better there than here for whatever reason, and try to be helpful. I think that's a humane thing to do. and you want that person that you terminated leaving your office, maybe not happy, but not angry at you or at the company or the bank or the university or whatever. So I think that's my advice to managers.
Well, those are excellent key points, not just for employees who are being terminated, but also for managers who are doing the termination, especially the idea of being developmental with employees by having a verbal warning and then a written warning and then progressively going into the termination if need be. But hopefully, as managers, our goal is always to prevent termination of employees. That's why we suggest the progressive discipline process. And it's fair for the employee. It's fair, obviously, for the organization. If the employee cannot do the job, then he or she needs to find something that he or she enjoys doing and is good at. And as you mentioned, hopefully both the employees and the managers are always concerned about performance, and all of the measurements are targeting performance, not necessarily attitude, not necessarily ethnicity, age or gender or sexual orientation or other protected categories of diversity. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for sharing all these great insights that are very practical and important for any workplace, especially for termination, for resignation in retirements, or transitions that take place for employees when they leave the organization. So I appreciate your insights, and thank you so much, Dr. Rolando Ochoa.
Thank you, and you have my eternal gratitude, not only for allowing me to do this video with you, but all the things that you have done with me, for me in the past. Thank you, and may God bless you.
Amen. You too. You too. Keep in mind that the practice of staying present will heal you in the moment without being angry. However, obsessing about how the future will turn out creates anxiety and more uncertainty. And also, replaying broken scenarios from your past tend to cause anger and sadness. So stay in the present and stay a professional as you transition from one organization or one industry into the next.